Welcome to A Moment with Modern Mentors. So hi, Genna.
Hello, how are you?
We've only recently met, and but immediately when you started telling me all about your story, I wanted to know more. So thank you so much for joining us on this podcast. This is our second season of A Moment with Modern Mentors, and we've called it A Call for Change, and it couldn't be more perfect for you. You are in the midst of a big change that you're making on the world. So please introduce yourself and tell us all about you.
I am Genna Chanelle Hayes, and I am a filmmaker and also the creator of the Loving Project, which is the Loving podcast and the Loving series. I've been making films for about 7 years, and I guess specifically I work in the human rights realm. So I tell stories that I believe need to be told in order to change the world, in order to catalyse positive change. So the first story I ever created 7 years ago was about domestic violence and women's homelessness. So that's kind of the first little one I made. And then I made a love story that brings Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australia together called Warunian, which is really beautiful. Fast forward to, I just finished my first feature called Ikoni, which is about a Nigerian refugee forced to integrate into Australian society because of conflict in his homeland. So I guess my life is driven by filmmaking, and and it's wonderful.
I want to get to that bit about the filmmaking, but I kind of want to understand a little bit more about how you got there and your journey getting there. Can you kind of dig in a little bit into your childhood, your background, your teen years, whatever was the point in your life that led you to filmmaking and making content and this kind of mission that you're on?
So I grew up on a sheep farm in country Victoria. So I had a beautiful, very sheltered childhood surrounded by animals, and my siblings used to call me Dr. Harry because I had so many animals, and you know who Dr. Harry is. He's that was on the TV at the time. And then when I was 16, I went overseas on my own for the first time. I moved to Oklahoma. So when I was 16, I left the farm, left home, and went to Oklahoma because I just wanted to see the world. And I was lucky enough to have a mum who supported me in that and helped fund that. I worked very hard as a checkout chick at Woolworths and IGA to save the money. And I moved to Oklahoma, which was the first time outside of my home, the farm, my very sheltered upbringing. And for the first time, I saw a lot of how the world operated when it comes to race, and when it comes specifically actually in that area, Oklahoma, which is like Midwest, Middle America. Race is it's a big deal. I saw, and the Oklahoma, the city, the town that I lived in there were no black students still in the town that I went to school in. When I was there, the first black student came, and it was a big deal because he was black. And one of the host families I lived with was incredibly racist. I lived with 3 host families. The second host family, they were good Bible church-going, Bible studying people, and we'd be like driving home from church on Sundays, and they would say if I saw an N-word, I'd run him over and shoot him down, or just this terrible perspective on the world and on other humans. And it was just incredibly hypocritical, because you present yourself to the world, and so many people present themselves to the world as and hide in their faith. They say they're amazing people, and they believe they're amazing people, but then they've got this perspective on the world that puts them in a superior position to the rest of humanity, and that is not okay. And that has been replicated around the world, as I see now, as someone who has obviously no longer lives in Oklahoma, and I have moved through a lot of different phases in my life, and
I need to understand a little bit more about how your parents let you get on a plane and go to Oklahoma with some host families. How did this happen?
So I forever wanted to go overseas when I was a kid. I just wanted to go. I just knew that there was more for me to see and do. And I wanted to go on exchange from when I was like 12 years old, and it never happened. And then I wanted to do it in high school because I wanted to learn. I wanted to, be around the cheerleaders and, those movies that we would see where it's the American life and the high school. And I wanted to be a part of that. And I was either going to go to Denmark or I was going to go to America. And I went to America. They put me in Oklahoma.
Was that for a year?
It was for a year, yeah.
And were you in like year 10 or 11 or something?
Yeah, year 11. Junior, yeah.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, and I did the prom and got the dress and I put on 10 kilos.
Full American. Full
absolutely. But I met some beautiful people. I really did. And my last host family were especially special and really took care of me. But yeah, it was a lot to take in, and it was a shock. And there was there was a bit of a struggle at the beginning when I got there and I wasn't taken care of properly. And yeah, Mum was worried over here in Australia because I was obviously 4 plane rides away from her, and not short plane rides, very long plane rides.
Yeah.
But yeah, my mum has always been someone who, sorry, I keep looking at my toes. My mum was always someone who told me that I could do and be whatever I wanted to be, and instilled confidence in me to go out and just take on the world, you know. So
she's incredible.
Yeah.
Why is she like that?
She has the most amazing parents. I have the most amazing grandparents. But also my mum, I think because she grew up in an era where men and their choices took priority. So my mum wanted to be a teacher. She wanted to be a school teacher, but she didn't go to university because she married my dad. And she's absolutely someone who I'm her. Like, she's someone who wanted to explore the world and all of that. But she got married when she was 19 or 21 and had my sister and my brother and me before she was 27. And my parents bought a farm 6 weeks after I was born, and we moved to the farm, and my mum helped my dad run the farm. And then my mum's just the most incredible, strong, beautiful human, and everything that she has done, it has been for her kids up until this day.
And generous.
Yeah, so she sacrificed everything to make sure we're okay. And so part of that sacrifice was letting me go to Oklahoma because I wanted to, because I felt like it was what I was supposed to do, and she's fully supported that. And she supports me to this day. Like, with my filmmaking, I couldn't have told any of the stories I told without her support. She is there for me 1,000,000%, whether it's financially, if I need it, emotionally, mentally, she's always there for me. So I certainly wouldn't be in this position having told, the stories that I've told her, and be able to tell these stories without having her as my mum.
That kind of takes you up to the filmmaking part. So you were in America and you're kind of having these amazing life experiences. What was kind of like the bridge to get to the filmmaking part of your life?
It took a while. When I was living on the farm, somehow I managed to get the New York Film Academy magazine sent to the farm, but I didn't connect the dots yet. I didn't know that was something I could do. And so I went over to Oklahoma. Then I came back and went to university in Brisbane because I'd never been to Queensland. So I chose to go to Brisbane to university, and Mum drove me up and dropped me off. And I studied journalism for 3 years, and with the idea I wanted to be a war correspondent. So I wanted to go and report on conflicts across the world. And I hadn't explored the world to the extent that I have now, obviously, but I knew that was what I wanted. I wanted to help in that capacity. And then when I graduated, I didn't even stick around for the graduation ceremony. The week of my last exam at university, I'd moved overseas already. I moved to Canada. And then I traveled the world for 3 years, and I've been backpacked on my own solo across like 60-ish countries. Wow. And the driving force behind that was, I guess, just curiosity. You know, I wanted to know how the world worked, and I wanted to know what was out there, and I wanted to, I was just curious, I guess, and I learned so much in that process. And I didn't know that I was, you know, back then I didn't know that's why I was doing it and how much I was actually learning and absorbing and digesting. But yeah, I learned a lot. And then I came back to Australia and went into journalism for 4 weeks, realized I wasn't going to be able to tell the stories I wanted to tell as someone who wanted to be a war correspondent over on the front lines. And so I became an actor and decided, okay, and I was always a bit curious about, I've always loved being in front of the camera. The camera is my buddy. Like I love that. And so, yeah, I started exploring acting. Wasn't that good at it to begin with. And then I moved to Los Angeles and, you know, I kept exploring that path and did some films and TV and it started moving. And then
how old were you by this stage?
24.
Yeah. So you've traveled the world, you've seen 60 countries, you've done a degree.
Yeah.
Now you're going into acting and you're moving to LA and living there with a network at all, or?
Nope. No, I knew no one.
You don't need it.
I'm a bit of a loner anyway. But I knew no one, but I knew that was the path that I needed to take, my next step. And it was not easy. There were a lot of struggles. I got into a bit of an abusive relationship and stuff over there, which happens to a lot of young girls who go to Los Angeles, you know, with big dreams. They do somehow get caught up in these abusive, it's kind of predatory in a way, that society for young women. With
people taking advantage of your naivety.
Absolutely. And being a young woman, you haven't quite grown into your strength, depending on how you grew up and all of that. But, you know, there are many lessons that you are yet to learn. So that's one of them that I learned. And then came back to Australia. And when I came back, I continued acting but organically started writing, directing. Well, writing actually comes first. And then I directed and produced my first short film, which was a 10-minute film about women's homelessness and domestic violence, Surviving Bug. And that was received really, really well.
And what was that called? The Dividing Bug?
Surviving Bug.
The Surviving Bug.
Bug, yeah. And it was received really, really, really well, which gave me the confidence probably to just keep going. So I straight away made my second film, Maurinian, which is the love story between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australia. I wanted to bridge that gap, and then I just kept going from there. Now 7 years later, I have just finished my first feature, my debut feature as a writer, director, producer. I did everything, writer, director, producer, and I acted in it. I do not recommend doing that. Anybody, just get a strong team. But I learned a lot of lessons, and I can make a feature from start to end with the most amazing crew that I could ask for. And I made that in Nigeria, Ghana, Australia, and the UK. So I made it across 4 countries, 3 continents, which feels like a massive accomplishment, and I'm really proud of. And
tell us a little bit about that feature film and from when you started it to when you finished it.
Yeah, sure. So my filmmaking is inspired by, I don't choose the stories I tell. They kind of just come into my realm. And a Coney, which is what it's called, I fell in love with a Nigerian in London, a British Nigerian, or British Nigerian. I fell in love. And so then I started researching Nigeria because I didn't know anything about Nigeria. I'd never been to Nigeria. I hadn't spent much time in Africa. And I learned about Boko Haram. Boko Haram are a terrorist group that are quite active in northeastern Nigeria, and they've killed thousands and thousands of people. And their primary purpose is to eradicate Western education. And keep they oppress women. They want to keep women. They want to maintain control of women and the way women operate in the world. And so, learning about all of this and seeing the damage that they had caused and the pain that Nigerians were going through because of their existence, that information combined with my love story that I was in the middle of, filtered through me, and out comes a script. And that's kind of how I tell my stories. It's triggered by things that come into my world, real life situations, my journey, and the human rights issues that I think are that I want to talk about. Yes, so I wrote it, and then it took me 3 years to complete it. We have, really proud of it, we have a Ghanaian, Nigerian, English and Australian cast. My lead actor is English, Nigerian descent. And yeah, and we haven't had an amazing crew. I've had an amazing, and I'm going to give him a mention, Callum Stewart. He was my cinematographer, and he, from the very start of that project, just trusted in me completely and followed me. I'm like, okay, we're going to Ghana now. And he's like, okay, I'm coming with. Just completely had complete faith in me. And that's not easy when you've got me, little old me, writing, directing, producing, running ragged, emotional, you know. He was an absolute rock, and this, I couldn't have done it without him, as well as, you know, there are other people like Rodrigo Balat, one of the best editors in Australia. I'm lucky enough to have the most amazing people around me who help me tell these stories.
And how do you think that you do build that team? Is it the story? Is it the fact that they see something that is a piece of gold and they just need to get involved? Like, what's the reason?
Yeah, I think so. I'm driven by purpose. Like, that's the only reason why I do it. It's very, very difficult. and I wouldn't do it if it wasn't what I was supposed to be doing, what I have to do. And I think people respond to that energy. Like, yeah. It's an energy that is beyond me. Like, it's purpose driven. People want to be a part of changing the world. And I'm just, really grateful that there are people that are so super talented and only elevate the project to a whole nother level.
One of the things when I'm hearing you describe your films and your work, is very much the impact that you're having on bringing a story that isn't your own story, not your culture story, to life. And I know you've told me separately that, you know, you've come up against some conflict over that. And I just wanted you to kind of share a little bit about your journey with telling these stories and the sensitivity around it, and how you're kind of evolving that.
Yeah. The stories I tell are my stories. They're always stories that bring worlds together. So there's always a perspective that is my perspective, but it also includes people from other worlds. So I've been having this conversation with friends lately, and because I'm about to step into another project that deals with human rights issues in this country, in Australia. And obviously one of the biggest human rights abuses we have in this country is our treatment of our First Nations people. So stepping into that territory and telling those stories, I was quite cautious and tentative about, and I actually said no, and we stopped the project last year. But my, Indigenous friends and leaders in the community who I am working with, they've encouraged me, and they think that it's important to tell these stories from my perspective, because my perspective is a different perspective, and it's a perspective that can help heal and educate and just bring good to hopefully change, to these situations. Like, so many Indigenous people are living below the poverty line in Australia. So many Indigenous communities have no access to education or resources, fresh water, food, work opportunities. Like, Australia as a country is so behind in taking care of our First Nations people. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. And if I can help contribute to that and help give voice to that and help spotlight these issues, then I think that's a good thing.
You've got to be brave, right? You've got to be a brave person, and that's taking courage.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think as I said before, all my stories are purpose driven. So I actually didn't choose this story. It just came into my world, and my instincts are like, we got to do this. And that's when I started speaking to Uncle Shane Phillips, who's an absolute hero in Redfern, and we started breaking it down and started thinking about what we could do with it. But I think if you are someone like me who comes from the world that I come from, I think it's important to really be clear on your intentions when you're telling these stories, or stories like these. My intentions are always good and pure, and I wouldn't operate in any other way. And if this project that I'm about to start was meant to happen 6 months ago, and I paused it and said, no, it's not me. I can't tell these stories, because I wasn't 100% sure that I should be operating in this space as the person that I am. But 6 months later, after a lot of self-reflection and a lot of thought, I am 100% confident that I can do this and will do this, and I'm really excited to do this. And I'm really, really excited to do it with the people that have come into my world, to create it. It's really exciting, and I think it has mass potential to change this country.
Well, before you tell us about the project, tell us a bit about the last 6 months then, and how you have overcome that fear, because I think this is the bit that, so many people have fears, whether it's personal, whether it's, from a business perspective, whether it's kind of a life, whether it's like a grand fear like you've been talking about today. Tell us how you've overcome your fear. What's been the process around that for you?
Yeah, sure. So I am pretty fearless when it comes to the way I operate in the world. But, when I started making films 7 years ago, as I said, I was really naive in the way the world worked. So I have felt negative energy coming toward me because I've told stories that include Indigenous issues. And, Warrinyan, my second film, was about an Indigenous boy with dreams of becoming Australia's first Indigenous Prime Minister. And I want that to happen, whether it's an Indigenous man or woman. Let's make that happen. So, and I was hurt by those negative perceptions of me. And, it's 4 years, and I didn't want to say much or do much. Since then, I kept creating, because I can't stop myself. When it comes to my creating, it just keeps coming, and I can't help it. But from there to now, and certainly through the year of COVID, the year that was, a lot of inner growth and healing and self-reflection and self-discovery. And I think at the end of it, at this point in time, I am very much in my power. I am incredibly confident in my capacity as a filmmaker, but I'm also incredibly confident in the voice that I have, and how my voice, and confident in the way that my voice can help heal our world, particularly right now, Australia. And I want to heal it. Like, I want to be a part of that, because there are so many people that I love that are Indigenous or are Black Australians from Africa, or, I want to help them have an easier life in this country and around the world. And if that means that I hustle to make films and docu-series and whatever, then absolutely, I'm going to do that, because I'm going to take responsibility and shoulder some of the burden, so they don't have to work so hard.
Yeah.
And coming to that understanding and recognizing that it is my responsibility as well to help in this space, then amazing. Great. Okay. I can do that. I can absolutely do that. And I can do that with confidence.
So almost a kind of a realization that you have to tell this story, or no one's going to do it. You've got a responsibility.
Yeah, well, I have a unique voice, like we all do. Like, everybody's got a unique voice, and I have a passion and a purpose to do this. And I also happen to have the right people in my life, or wonderful people in my life, that will help me and are excited to help me do it. Like, we're doing it together. It's not me, it's us working as a team to spotlight these issues so we can change them and bring everybody up to the same level of living, with with justice and equality, and everybody also owning their self-worth, because a lot of people there, that's a problem, and that's, you know, because of the history of the world and how it has come to be.
How do you feel that your films and your content makes that difference? What do you think is the power behind it?
I hope that it makes a difference. I hope anybody who watches it, I hope it can change people's perspectives, or help in changing people's perspectives on the world and on in certain parts of the world. That's my hope. I don't know. I'm not in control of how it's received, but I hope that I can help change people's perspectives, educate people, show people things that they might not see otherwise, so they can then look at every person in this world as their equal, you know, not down on them, no judgment in any way, except let's do this together.
So do you want to talk about the film, or do you want to talk about the podcast? What?
So I just finished a podcast, my first podcast, called The Loving Podcast. And it is, so it actually, I've got the docu-series as well, which is what I'm stepping into next. But the podcast kind of came from the docu-series. But the podcast, I was talking to Uncle Shane Phillips in Redfern through COVID. And I came away from one of our conversations one day and was like, our conversations are amazing, like 2-hour conversations. We can't stop talking. We're just sharing and learning about each other's perspectives. And I'm like, the world should hear these conversations. And then, you know, a couple of days before, I had Alison Battison, who is a human rights lawyer who uses her everything, dedicates her whole life to freeing refugees and asylum seekers caught up in Australian immigration detention centres. And she was sitting on my couch, and we had the most amazing, you know, 2-hour chat then. And I was like, these conversations, these people need to be shared with the world. I know them and I get to chat with them, but I want everybody else to get to chat with them too. So I made a podcast focused on sharing these voices. So I speak to 11 people who I think are earth angels, people who are put in this world to help heal this world in this time and in this place. And it's incredible. The conversations we have are really deep, really intense. Some of them are fun, and they're all different. Like, everybody brings a different kind of energy and vibe to each episode. We start with Luke Currie-Richardson, who is a wonderful young Indigenous man who is really actively sharing his voice and working to elevate Indigenous communities around Australia. We talked to Alison, who I just mentioned, and Uncle Shane about community, because he reduced crime rate in Redfern by 80% by building a relationship with the police and Indigenous Australia. And I think it happened within a month or something. So he's an absolute
connector.
Yeah, hero, absolute angel. And Samantha Harris, who is one of Australia's first Indigenous models to actually penetrate the international modelling entertainment scene. She's an absolute beauty, and she's also working with World Vision to help empower Indigenous girls and communities. So we speak to her. Tariro Mavondo, who's is a really good friend of mine. We speak about the experience of Black girls and white girls and how we can work together in moving forward. Who else? Tara Winkler. Tara Winkler is an absolute powerhouse, and she's this tiny human. She's literally changing law or driving the change of law in Cambodia to close down commercialized orphanages and ensure that children who have families are not put in orphanages but stay with their families. She's literally rebuilding communities and empowering Cambodian people, so they are in charge of their own lives and their own communities, and they're driving the change. It's not driven by the West. Commercialized orphanages is a product, a institution that is created by the West, and she is literally breaking down those barriers, breaking down those false beliefs and breaking down the whole institution over there to actually rebuild Cambodian communities from the ground up based on how Cambodians want their communities to be. Like,
wow.
I just got shivers. She's incredible. So people like this I am speaking to, who I'm so lucky to be friends with and have in my life. And I want everybody to know who they are, and I want everybody to be inspired by them, because I think by having people in your world who inspire you makes you be better and do better.
I mean, it's incredible. And you call it the Loving Podcast. How did you come up with that name?
I'm all about love. My production company is called One Love Films. There was no other name.
And so you've put this podcast series together, and it'll launch in the coming weeks, right?
Yeah, I think we'll launch end of March, start of April. That's our plan. And we will release one episode a week for 11 weeks.
Beautiful. And this is really a kind of like a passion project of yours. You've done it over the last 12 months and you're pulling it together now, but it's a stepping stone also into kind of bringing this to life visually too. I know you've taken a lot of footage and photography around the podcast, but there's a film.
There is.
There.
Yeah, so there's a docu-series, and the docu-series was actually how it all started. So the docu-series was focused on human rights issues that I want to spotlight in this country. And yeah, I backed away from it last year and then decided, no, I'm going to do a podcast instead. And in doing the podcast, I'm going to do the docu-series too. And at this moment, it's called the Loving Series, and it absolutely has the same purpose as the podcast. It's just about elevating every human across the land to the same level, same standard of living.
And will you interview the same people, or will it be a different collection of people?
It'll be a combination. It's much grander, because obviously when you add the visual element, there's a whole other side of it. So it will be much grander, and that's obviously my forte. But it'll include some of my people, including Uncle Bruce Shillingsworth, Uncle Shane in Redfern. It'll have a bit of both, but it certainly isn't exactly the same as the podcast.
And how did you meet these people initially to kind of get you to this position of having this close relationship, or is it kind of just been a bit of a situational situation?
Yeah, I mean, it just happens organically. I think everything I do, I'm just in flow. Like, I allow the universe to bring whatever's right in that moment. Uncle Shane, I was working as a temp, being a EA to a wonderful man in a financial firm in the city for 4 weeks while I was finishing a Coney. And he heard about my work, and I think he might have secretly Googled me and found out what I do, because I didn't tell him anything. I was really shy and just like, yes, I'll get your coffee. And he told me,
a Hollywood actress in his office.
And he told me that I should get in touch with Uncle Shane Phillips, who he knew, and that brought Uncle Shane on my radar. And then I didn't meet Uncle Shane until like a year later. And the way I met him, I reached out to him pre-COVID. And yeah, we just started chatting, and it just didn't stop. And the momentum, and I love him. He's one of my favorite people in the world. He's just one of the best people I know.
And I love this concept of being kind of in flow, and it just life happening for you. And it sounds like every step of the way your life has kind of had a purpose. You might not have been aware of it, but it's taking you on this journey. Where do you think you are now in the midst of it? I know you're kind of in this activist role, but you're a filmmaker, a content creator. Where does this lead to for you?
Well, I want to be a mum and a wife.
Yes.
In the distant future, but I'm a filmmaker. I love making films, and I'm lucky enough to be so passionate about human rights that's why I do it, and they work together. I am aware that in order for my films to be able to, make the change that I hope they can make, they need to be in the world and be seen by people and all of that. So I'm just ready for whatever comes. I want to do everything I can to help, in the capacity that am I able to. So I don't know that I have much control over the future, but I know the direction I take is I'm going to keep making films. Or the direction I want to take is I want to keep making films. I want to keep creating. The stories keep coming. I can't stop them.
I was going to say, is there more stories in there? So once you've got the Loving series.
Yeah, I've got Olivia that I wrote it in 7 days during COVID in like September last year. So I want to go shoot that down in Melbourne as soon as, or middle of this year. So maybe doing the series and Olivia alongside each other. Yeah, they don't stop. Somehow they just keep going, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful that they do. I do need a break and all of that, and I do want to squeeze in a family and get some balance, but I also want to live every moment that I can in the world, you know, while I'm here.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about Olivia?
Olivia, do I want to tell you, or do I want to keep it under wraps? Olivia, I will just tell you that Olivia focuses on femicide. Femicide is homicide, like women being killed, like homicide, femicide. So many women around the world are killed at the hands of men, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's on the street, whether it's in a conflict zone. So Olivia focuses on femicide in the Western world. Yeah, it's really, really important, and I'm really excited to tell it. And it's really sad because the whole issue, the whole problem is really sad. But yeah, it's a really powerful story that I can't wait to shoot.
Will you act in that one?
I want to, yeah. I want to act in it, and I want to direct it, and I will produce it, but I want to start handing off some responsibilities. So I want to get some great producers, great female producers actually, on board this project, and I'll be with my cinematographer Callum Stewart. He'll be on. I'd love to have my editor Rodrigo on, but he's hectic, so we'll see if I can get him. But yeah, I certainly do want to act in it.
And I mean, you mentioned that you want to, you know, be a mum and a wife at some point. How do you fit in a personal life in all of this activity? Because it sounds like you are very busy filling, you know, your time with your work. How does it all kind of go hand in hand with having your...
It doesn't. I haven't had a personal life. For the last 4 years, I very much have not had a balanced life. I haven't had a personal life. And I'm aware of that. And, you know, I've just done a lot of work on myself through COVID, figuring out what I want and how I want to do it. And yeah, so the busier you are, the less time you obviously have for others. I don't know how it'll work out when I do add someone into the equation, but I'll have to figure it out along the way.
Yeah, maybe at the end of the year after you've done the film.
I'm ready. I am ready. And I'm putting that into the world. And
yeah, that's right.
The universe knows that it's
yeah.
fun. Yeah.
Well, that's it. That's half the battle is actually just being able to express that desire, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're doing some incredible work. You glow with the enthusiasm and the story and the journey that you're on. It's like it's your life's work. I mean, a lot of people will listen and watch this and see someone who they feel is really, you know, taking advantage of every moment of their time and life. And I mean, you said you feel proud of the work that you're doing, and you absolutely should. It's incredible work, and I can't wait to see it come out. And you know, it's really going to be game changing, and it's a perfect time to do it as well. I think it's, you know, the moment is now for people and women especially to strike and have a voice and speak up. And it's, you know, brave of you to do that. So thank you for doing it.
Have a voice. Everybody should have a voice. All of our voices should be equal, you know, no matter what color our skin is, no matter what sex we are, we all should feel that we are equal, as important as each other.
I think, you know, being a woman and, you know, in this era, you're starting to feel more confident talking up about things that maybe didn't feel right in the past. But I don't think, I mean, it's really interesting because, you're kind of focusing in the Loving series on white versus black and Indigenous and the rights of different cultures and diversity. But actually, interestingly, gender is, at the hot topic at the moment, where men and women are literally kind of trying to find their equality still in 2020, which seems phenomenal. And I think
we do talk about that in episode 3 of the podcast as well. Like, that is absolutely something that is as important as everything else.
And I mean, I guess one of the things we like to talk about is, one of those things, if you had a podium that you could just, with your megaphone, talk to the world, tell them your big message. What is that big message for people out there?
Unity. One love. Like, let's just get together and be all right. Like, it's just, let's do this together. Let's love each other. It's just very simple. I know the complexities of the world complicate it, but just having love for each other and respecting each other and taking care of each other. I think that's what it's about. I think the Western world has created an isolated world where everybody is isolated on their own little island, and especially technology is fast tracking that. And I think we need to return to community. We need to return to connection and return to each other. And that's just love,
And stories, sharing.
Yeah, sharing each other's space and stories, and hearing each other's perspectives and loving each other no matter your perspectives. You might have an opposite perspective of me or opinion about something, but that doesn't mean that we can't love each other.
I think there's another word that kind of springs to my mind is trusting, because I think, trusting, and a lot of trust needs to go into what you're doing. People are sharing their stories with you, trusting them with you, that you'll do something good with them. And it does take a lot of faith, doesn't it, to tell these stories, but also to receive them and to distribute them.
Yeah. Do you know what? I've never thought of that in by way of the amount of trust that people put in me to actually do right by them by presenting their stories to the world.
Yeah.
That requires a lot of trust in me.
Yeah.
I appreciate
you could really tell a strange version of that story, and they've got to trust. Have they seen the output yet? Have they listened? What's their response been?
Well, I generally, not yet with the podcast, but I generally do. I asked Uncle Shane and Luke whether they wanted to listen to it. Like, I asked people if they want to sign off if I know that it's sensitive information, but no, they all said, I trust you. I trust you.
There you go. Well, one final question, actually, and it's the one we ask all of our podcast guests is, what is one of your favorite books, if you have one, that you would like to share?
Yeah, I've got a few, actually. The one that is being kind of very present in my world right now, I went and had a NLP hypnosis healing session. And in that session, I walked in and there was a book sitting on the table, and it was called Powerful and Feminine by Rachel Jane Groover. That book, as a woman, and as a woman who is very soft, but also has been operating in my masculine energy for a long time, is changing my life, the way I approach the world. So I have recommended it to so many of my female friends, and they're all like, yeah, they're all buying it and reading it, and it's amazing. Things Fall Apart by Nigerian author Chinua Achebe. I think that's how you say his name. I'm sorry if it's wrong. That's a book that every person should read. I don't even want to say anything else about it except read it. Things Fall Apart. Last year I read so many books. That's my bookshelf over there. Sand Talk by the brilliant Indigenous author Tyson Yunkaporta. That book, for Australians, and especially white Australians learning about Indigenous history, I think that's a really important book. My friend Sierra Leonean Aminata Konta-Bajua released her book Rising Heart last year. Aminata's in the podcast series, and her book is absolutely incredible. I love The Alchemist. It just reminds you to live in faith every day, which is the ultimate, I think. Yeah, so many books.
Yeah, we're going to be putting them up on our book club list for sure. They sound great. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
It's been incredible talking to you. And I just, like I said, I'm just loving the mission that you're on. I can't wait to see everything unfold for the rest of the year for you. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast and, talking about your contribution to change. You're making a huge change. So we really appreciate you being on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you, and I appreciate everybody that is working. I'm working with other people to change together. Nothing's done by one person, so it's all of us. So you're doing it too. Well done.
If you enjoy this podcast, subscribe via your preferred podcast platform for more episodes of A Moment with Modern Mentors.